So today, if you read the email, we're going to be focusing primarily on the book of 1 Thessalonians, specifically chapter 2. So if you all start turning there, I will give you all a little bit of a historical background of the chapter. Chronologically, 1 Thessalonians is one of the earliest of Paul's letters in the Bible, and he's writing it to the church at Thessalonica, the Thessalonian church. And you can read about in Acts what his first journey to Thessalonica was like. But basically he went, and there was a Jewish and a Gentile population there. And he went to lead them to Christ, and the Jewish population as a whole was not very receptive, whereas a very good number of the Gentiles were. So he helped to start a church there, and then the Jewish group that was not very receptive were very not receptive, and they turned angry and formed a mob and were dragging people out in the streets trying to find him. So in order to keep him safe, the church sent Paul away. And this is him shortly after. He sent Timothy back to them with this letter, getting back in touch with them and trying to encourage them. So if you all are in 1 Thessalonians 2, would someone mind reading for me verses 1 through 8?
For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. But after we had already suffered and been mistreated in Philippi, as you know, we had the boldness in our God to speak to you the gospel of God amid much opposition. For our exhortation does not come from error or impurity or by way of deceit. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God who examines our hearts. For we never came with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ we might have asserted our authority. But we proved to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. Having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us.
And if someone will read 9 through 12.
Don't you remember, dear brothers and sisters, how hard we worked among you? Night and day we toiled to earn a living so that we would not be a burden to any of you as we preached God's good news to you. You yourselves are our witnesses, and so is God, that we were devout and honest and faultless toward all of you believers. And you know that we treated each of you as a father treats his own children. We pleaded with you, encouraged you, and urged you to live your lives in a way that God would consider worthy, for he called you to share in his kingdom and glory.
All right, thank you all. Now, from reading this chapter many times over the past few weeks, I just believe there's a whole lot here, so many ways of Paul that we can emulate in the way that we share the gospel and the way that we witness, so that we can witness in an effective manner. So what I'd like to do today are to dig into this chapter and kind of outline 6 keys. You can see behind me, they're not up there yet. 6 keys to having the heart of a witness, to being an effective witness. So we'll start with the first of those keys in verse 4. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with the pretext for greed. God is witness. So the first key to having the heart of a witness is speaking the truth. And as you can see here, Paul did not come to this church with words pleasing to the ears of man. He didn't come to tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. And I kind of went over it very quickly in the historical background, and y'all were kind of flipping through pages. So if you didn't catch it, the Thessalonian church was made up mostly of Gentile people at this time. And Gentile people were very worldly. They had not grown up in the faith. They were very obsessed with and seeking personal desires and sinful lusts. So for Paul to come to these people, trying to get them to Jesus, trying to get them to his cause, by telling them what they enjoyed doing was wrong, took a whole lot of courage. I mean, think now to, the presidential election right now, how all these people are trying to get you to their cause, to support them, and they're telling you exactly what you want to hear or what they think you want to hear. Now, whether they follow up on that or not is a different story, but it would make logical sense that the easiest way to get someone to follow your cause or to support you by telling them exactly what they want to hear. But that's not how you witness effectively. Paul was not afraid to tell them what they didn't want to hear, and that's not just something that Paul did, but it's also something that Jesus did. So if you all will keep a hand there in 1 Thessalonians and turn to Matthew chapter 8. And once we get there, will someone read for me verses 18 through 22?
When Jesus saw large crowds around him, he gave the order to go to the other side and so to see. A scribe approached him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus told him, sorry, what is it?
Through 22.
Jesus told him, "Foxes have dens and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Lord, another of his disciples said, "First let me bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead."
So that's a little bit blunt. Jesus telling this guy, forget about your dad, you come follow me now. And it's probably not what that guy wanted to hear, but it was the truth. And I've said it was the truth a couple of times already, so I'd like to let you all know that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, all of the 6 keys from a Christian perspective, are kind of self-explanatory. They're things that you would do just because they're in the Bible, or just because Paul does them, or just because Jesus does them, which are all valid reasons, but I'd like to try to dig a little deeper and show the importance of following these keys and taking these keys to heart in the way that you witness. And for speaking the truth, I think the easiest way to show that is to show what happens or what would happen in the event that you're not speaking the truth when you're witnessing. So how many of you in here have heard of the prosperity gospel before? For those of you that don't know, the prosperity gospel is a gospel, which I use very loosely and with heavy quotation marks, that basically teaches people if you pray, if you tithe, if you meet this laundry list of things, that God will give you every earthly desire that you could ever want. And that's not the truth. That's not scripturally backed or scripturally sound. God is going to bless us in immense ways beyond what we can imagine, but it's not always the worldly things that we want. It's what He wants. And the danger of these untruthful teachings, especially in this case, is that it gives the people that listen to it a warped view of God and a warped relationship with God. In the prosperity gospel's case, it's taking the focus of the relationship off of God and onto man. And it's almost relegating God to some role as a genie that's only there to give us exactly what we want. Just like right here, if Jesus had told this guy, you go bury your father and then you follow me, that would have been a very nice thing to say. And it would have been very benevolent. But had He told them that would be Jesus saying, your will comes before my will. The needs of man come before the needs of God. And that wouldn't be the truth. And when we're witnessing to people and trying to lead them to Christ, we need to make a point to try to set them up on the path to success, on the right path. And you start that by speaking the truth when you're witnessing. All right, you can turn back to 1 Thessalonians, and key number 2 will start in verse 6. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. And the second key to having the heart of a witness is having the right intentions. Now, Paul was coming to these people with pretty much the keys. Let me spell it right, I think. Paul was coming to these people with the keys to eternal life. He was coming with the way to make it to heaven, and he could have demanded the rock star treatment. He could have demanded he be put up in a nice house, be given money and gold and good food, but he realized that what was important was the salvation of all these people, not on his own personal, sinful desires. But in reading through this verse especially, it brought to mind another set of verses that Paul wrote in a different letter. So if you'll again, going to be kind of jumping around, but always keep a hand in 1 Thessalonians. If y'all will turn to Philippians chapter 1. And if someone will read for me verses 15 through 18.
It's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice.
So there were people back in Paul's time and now that are proclaiming the gospel, that are trying to spread Jesus' name for the complete wrong intentions. And he's rejoicing in that fact, just that the name of Jesus be spread. And I just told you all that you need to have the right intentions. So I don't want you all to think that I'm trying to teach you anything that's not scripturally backed or scripturally sound. That would not be me speaking the truth. So again, I'd like to show you exactly why being an effective witness requires you to have the right intentions. And I can't think of a better example than that of Judas Iscariot. We all know now, hopefully, that Judas is the disciple that ended up betraying Jesus. But while we know that in hindsight, he was one of the 12 disciples. He was taught the same lessons as the other 12. He spent a lot of time with Jesus like them. He was sent out with the same ability to perform miracles and sent out with the same charges as the other 12. And I'm sure he led quite a good number of people to Christ. So, it is absolutely possible for people with the wrong intentions to lead someone to Christ. But I'd like to look at an example from Judas's life to show you the danger of that. So if you all will turn to John chapter 12. And if someone will read verses 1 through 8 for me when you get there.
6 days before the Passover celebration began, Jesus arrived at Bethany, the home of Lazarus, the man he had raised from the dead. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those who ate with him. Then Mary took a 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance. But Judas Iscariot, the disciple who would soon betray him, said, "That perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor." Not that he cared for the poor, he was a thief, and since he was in charge of the disciples' money, he often stole some for himself. Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me."
Thank you. So as you can see here, Judas's heart was not on God where it should have been, but on his own selfish ambition and selfish desires. And what Judas said in a complete vacuum probably doesn't sound that bad. Why do you have this expensive perfume? You could have sold it and given money to the poor. That's a nice thing to say, and it's a benevolent thing to say. But context is important, especially in the Bible, and it wasn't a Christian thing to say. Because anointing Jesus with this oil was not about showing off. It was not about throwing money in anyone's face. It was about giving your best to honor God and enjoying the time on earth that you still had with Jesus. And this just shows the danger of having the wrong intentions when you're sharing the gospel. And that is that it becomes so easy for your words to be twisted or for your heart to be twisted to the point where you're not speaking the truth, where you're speaking out of selfish ambition and desire, and you're not setting people up on the pathway to success. You're teaching them something that's not true, and you're teaching them something that may cause them to stumble on down the line. So, to be an effective witness, you need to speak the truth and you need to have the right intentions. Now, we'll turn back to 1 Thessalonians, and we will look in verse 8 for key number 3. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very, very dear to us. And key number 3 is invest in yourself. Now, I'm going to warn you that Brother Holly almost word for word took the point I was going to try to make today and said it in a better way than I ever could have. So, I hope you were paying attention, and I hope you're not expecting me to live up to that. But Andy did a great job of kind of explaining this in his Sharing the Gospel Relationally lesson. So if I can add a footnote or a hyperlink or encourage you, once we can finally get it posted, to go back and listen to that lesson of his, I would very highly encourage it. He did a great job. And these are my own words, my own take on something that I got from his lesson. But basically, these people that you're witnessing to, that you're sharing the gospel with, you can't see them as targets, and you can't see them as notches to add to your belt in some, belt of getting people to convert. You need to invest in them as people. Like Brother Holly was saying, today, just being with them and encouraging them, investing in them and praying for them. It's giving you an opportunity to show them that the way you live your life is different, that as a Christian you're above the world, that you're living a different way, and you're opening the door for yourself to be able to explain to them why that is, and opening that door for you to be able to witness to them. not just even personally invest in yourself, but if you look in verse 9, for you remember, brothers, our labor and toil, we work night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you, while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. Invest yourself physically. One of the easiest ways to make a good impression on someone is to do harsh manual labor that no one wants to do. There's not just a whole lot of people in this world that will go out of their way to do that for their own selfish desires. And again, it's all about building these relationships. It's all about, growing close with these people. It's about showing them that you are different and being able to show to them and explain to them why exactly that is. Now, there are going to be opportunities, or not opportunities, but times when you're only going to have 5 minutes with someone and you're never going to see them again. And you do need to be prepared for that. Go and listen to Andy's other lesson, sharing the gospel spontaneously. But there's so many people just think in your lives that you see on a daily basis. So many people that you have the opportunity to witness to, whether explicitly through your words or just through the way that you live your life. So you really need to invest in these people, invest yourself, and build these relationships. All right, the fourth key in verse 10, you are witnesses in God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. Now, originally, when I was going over the first draft of this lesson plan, I had titled this point, Practicing What You Preach. But even from a digging deep perspective, that seems pretty self-explanatory. One of the quickest ways to tear down the work you've done is to be a hypocrite about it. But over the past 5 weeks, I've had the opportunity with my small group to go over the book of 1 Thessalonians. And that was, again, not something that was intentionally planned, but God just made it work out that way. So after being able to, read and get the entire context of this book and see the other guys' opinions and perspectives on this book, I've renamed the fourth key to having the heart of a witness, being a good imitator. And as you all probably know, what being an imitator is doing exactly what someone else is doing. But what it means in this context is that if you will read through the book of 1 Thessalonians, or you'll read through any of Paul's other books in the Bible, you'll see that numerous times he makes reference to Paul being an imitator of God, or the people Paul is teaching being an imitator of Paul, who is an imitator of God. And basically what that means is these new people that Paul is witnessing to, these new believers, they are looking to him to imitate him. So by him imitating God in a perfect way, they're indirectly imitating God, which is what we need to strive to do in our own lives, to be a perfect imitation of God. And the best way that I can kind of showcase why it's important to have as perfect of an imitation of God as possible is through the game of telephone. We're not going to get up here and play it, as fun as that would be. That would waste a lot of time. But for anyone that hasn't played the game of telephone, you get a lot of people and you line them up shoulder to shoulder. And someone will whisper a funny phrase into the first person's ear, and it's their job to whisper it to the next person, and on down the line. And the fun part is when you get to the last person, and you see if the last person and the first person have heard the same phrase. Because oftentimes someone along the line will not enunciate correctly, or someone will mishear something, and that message will get corrupted on down the line. And just think of that as an image of the way that we imitate Christ. We're called to be witnesses. We're called to share the gospel, as the lesson today talked about. And if we have a glaring hole in our imitation of God, then anyone that we share the gospel with is going to have that, by imitating us, is going to have that same glaring hole. And then if they go on and they go on to witness to somebody else, and they have another hole, then that person's going to have two holes. And it's important to know that sharing the gospel is not just a one-off thing. The influence we have on one person we witness to is going to have, whether directly or indirectly, an influence on a whole lot more people, hopefully. So we need to make sure that, we're imitating God in the most perfect way we can. Now, I know perfection is not possible. I know that firsthand. But, those old posters that were in elementary schools, shoot for the moon and fall among the stars, which is not astronomically correct at all. But the sentiment is there that you need to aim for perfection. When you think eyes are on you, when you don't think eyes are on you, your life serves as a testimony to God and as your witness. So in your everyday life, in the way that you witness, you need to strive to have a perfect So let's change that from good. Being a perfect imitator, or as perfect as you can be. So the fifth key is in verse 12. We exhorted each one of you, encouraged you, and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. And the fifth key is being encouraging. And I gotta be honest, I'm trying to dig deep and explain why this is important. This is the one that I struggle the most with because it is kind of self-explanatory. So if the substitute teacher is allowed to give homework, I would assign all of you all sometime in the next couple weeks, just read through the entire book of 1 Thessalonians and just count how many times Paul makes reference to encouraging or exhorting, getting the best out of someone. It's so often in this book and so often throughout all of his books. I mean, as Christians, we're constantly assaulted by the world, by sin, by temptation. We need to make sure that we're not tearing each other down ourselves. And I guess one point I can make is when I was talking about speaking the truth, I said you can't go to people and tell them exactly what they want to hear. But that doesn't mean that you can't be encouraging. While you may need to tell someone, hey, you need to change the way you're living, there's something you're doing that's wrong, you can tell them, but if you do, and if you're a Christian and you live in this way, you get eternal life and a relationship with God and prayer and grace and mercy and all of these things. So it's important to note speaking the truth and being encouraging aren't mutually exclusive. So don't be one of those people that are outside of Neyland Stadium waving around the neon sign, screaming at people that they're going to go to hell because, they can see your ankles or whatever. Be encouraging to people in the way that you witness. So if you've noticed a trend through this chapter, I've kind of been going through these points a little bit quick, but I've kind of been going sequentially in verse. So I'm going to switch it up for the sixth point, and we're going to look back at the first verse in chapter 2. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. There were so many people in the world at this point and just throughout his life that Paul led to Jesus. So many people at Thessalonica, at Philippi, at the church at Ephesus, so many. But there were also a lot that he shared the gospel with that he failed to convert. And there were a lot that he failed to convert, as in Thessalonica, that wanted to hunt him down and hurt him if not kill him. But as you can see here, he's not dwelling on the fact. He's not dwelling on those that he wasn't able to lead to God. And so I want to make the sixth point, and this may be one of the most important points, keys to having the heart of a witness and when sharing the gospel, is discerning failure. Get low. I should have planned this a little bit better. But I think it's one of the most common attacks that Satan will use on us, that when we share the gospel with people and we don't get results or we don't get immediate results, that somehow we have failed. And that's just absolutely not true. I think the act of sharing the gospel is probably best summed up by the parable of the sower. We're not going to turn there and read all of it. It's in Matthew 13, and I believe at least one other of the first four Gospels. But basically, Jesus is talking about sharing the gospel, or seeds, are scattered among the road, in the thorns, on rocky soil, and on good soil. And what he means is that when we share the gospel with people, the people being the ground, they're going to receive it in a different way. And it's not our job as witnesses to determine what type of ground that other people are. It's our job to plant the seed. And if you can't get enough of agricultural images, I think Paul also does a very good job of kind of summarizing this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. So if you all, or 1 Corinthians chapter 3, excuse me. So if you all will turn there, and if someone will read for me verses 6 through 10.
I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. according to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care of how he builds upon it.
So as you can see, Paul is not lamenting the fact that he has shared the gospel with people and they haven't seen results yet. He talks about building a foundation. And that's something that when we plant the seeds, one, don't think that not getting results is failure. That's not our job. We can't be their salvation. That's God's job. As you can see here, God provides the growth. But we can also hope and hopefully be encouraged by the fact that even if what we do is small, if the foundation we build is not much, that we can hope that someone will come along and be able to build upon that and be able to turn that into someone's salvation. I personally have not, to my knowledge, directly led anyone to come to Christ. I've planted seeds. I've missed some opportunities to plant seeds I wish I could have back. But I have to hope that even as little as I've done in some cases, that someone will be able to leverage that or use that to build something greater. One of the best things that came from the week that Andy was teaching was actually not Andy's teaching as good as it was. It was when Alex shared her testimony. And you said at one point, talking about starting your Bible group, I'd like to tell you all we had some great big revival and everyone got saved, but it didn't happen. And it doesn't always happen. We can't dwell on that. It's not our job. So don't be deceived as to what failure is. As cliche as it is, the only way you fail is to not try. So don't be deceived as to what failure is, and don't let a fear of not getting immediate results prevent you from sharing the gospel. So those are the 6 keys. Kind of went through them a little bit quick, but speak the truth, having the right intentions, investing yourself, being a perfect imitator, being encouraging and discerning failure. And I hope these are keys that you've learned something from, that have struck a chord in you, that you'll be able to take and be able to use in your life and use in the way that you share the gospel. So thank you all for letting me get up here and talk and teach.